In the summer of 1215, a terrified king made a desperate decision that would accidentally birth the idea of freedom itself. And the man who saved it was never supposed to exist. Every schoolchild is told the story of Magna Carta. King John, bad ruler, angry barons, a field at Runnymede, and a document signed under protest. Clean, tidy, forgettable. But that version leaves out the warrior monks who turned a church into a fortress bank. It leaves out the most feared knight in all of Christendom who refused to let England tear itself apart. And it leaves out the real reason King John went to that field at all, not because he had a change of heart, but because he had run out of places to hide. This is the story of how one document, born in violence, dragged across centuries of betrayal and war, became the skeleton of every democracy on earth. And it almost didn't survive the week. To understand what happened in 1215, you need to understand what kind of man John was. Because the barons who rose against him weren't radicals. They weren't revolutionaries. They were men who had tried everything else first. John had inherited the English throne in 1199 after the death of his brother, Richard the Lionheart. Richard had been absent, reckless, and expensive, but he was magnificent in battle, and the barons forgave him for it. John was absent, reckless, and expensive too, but he lost. He surrendered Normandy to the French in 1204, stripping the English nobility of their ancestral lands across the Channel. Then he spent the next decade trying to buy those lands back with money squeezed from the same men he had just humiliated. The tax machine John built was almost admirable in its cruelty. He tripled the scutage, the payment knights made instead of riding to war. He inflated inheritance fees until the sons of dead barons had to surrender entire estates just to inherit the name. He fined men for breathing wrong in his court. He sold justice like a market stall, dropping charges for the right sum and manufacturing them for the wrong enemy. He expanded the royal forest until a third of England was the king's personal hunting preserve. Step inside it to gather firewood, and you could lose a hand. Kill a deer, and you might lose your eyes. This was not taxation, this was extraction. And the barons, men who had sworn oaths, who had sons in John's household, who had given him everything, finally reached the point where oath-breaking felt like a lesser sin than surrender. The breaking point came in 1214, when John staked everything on a military campaign in France to retake Normandy. His allies were crushed at the Battle of Bouvines. He came home broke, defeated, and now facing something worse than France. He came home to England. By January 1215, the barons had stopped sending politely worded petitions. They had started sharpening swords. Secret meetings became open assemblies. Open assemblies became armed columns. And those armed columns marched on London, where to everyone's shock and John's permanent humiliation, the citizens opened the gates. John was not just losing a political argument, he was losing a city. And a king without London is not a king at all. He made a move that tells you everything about the state of his reign. He fled to the one address in London that no rebel army would touch: Temple Church, the London headquarters of the Knights Templar. Think about what that tells you. The most powerful king in England, the anointed monarch of a kingdom that stretched from Scotland to the Welsh Marches, could only find safety in a building that belonged to someone else. He was a guest in his own capital, and the men offering him shelter were not soldiers of the crown. They were warrior monks who answered to God, to Rome, and to no one else. The Knights Templar were not what most people imagine when they picture medieval monks. They had not retreated from the world. They had conquered it. Founded in Jerusalem in 1119 to protect Christian pilgrims on the road to the Holy Land, the Templars had evolved into something that had never existed before: an international military and financial network that spanned from the mountains of Cyprus to the docks of London. Kings borrowed from them. Crusading armies traveled on their letters of credit. Their round churches, built to echo the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, served as vaults for the most sensitive documents in Christendom. And in London in the winter of 1215, the master of the temple in England was a man named Amory de Saint-Maur. He was not a famous name. He has no great battles attached to it. But in those desperate weeks, he held a position of extraordinary power. He controlled the only neutral ground in a city on the verge of civil war. The Templars gave John shelter, but not out of loyalty, out of calculation. A collapsed kingdom meant collapsed markets, collapsed loans, and chaos that served no one. If there was going to be peace, someone needed to hold the room long enough for it to happen. And the man they trusted to hold it was not the king. William Marshal, Earl of Pembroke, was 70 years old in 1215. He had survived 4 kings. He had fought in over 500 tournaments across Europe, a circuit so brutal that professional tournament fighters rarely survived their 30s. He had been captured, ransomed, exiled, and recalled so many times that his biography reads like a medieval thriller. His contemporaries did not call him England's greatest knight as a courtesy. They called him that because they had run out of words that meant something more. Marshal had served Henry II, Richard the Lionheart, and now John, not because he loved John, but because he had sworn an oath, and William Marshal did not break oaths. It was the one quality that made him trusted by people who trusted nobody. Rebels trusted him. Templars trusted him. Even John, who trusted no one, trusted him, because Marshal was the only man in England who consistently told the king things the king did not want to hear. In those negotiations at Temple Church, Marshal moved between John and the rebel barons not as a royal errand boy, but as the only person in the room both sides could look at without reaching for a weapon. He understood what the barons wanted because he agreed with most of it. He understood what John feared because he had been managing royal fear for 40 years. And he understood what England needed because he had watched the alternative, open civil war, destroy everything it touched. On the 15th of June, 1215, King John rode out to a meadow beside the Thames called Runnymede. He did not go there because he had become a better man. He went there because he had no army, no city, no allies, and no options. The Magna Carta was not a moment of royal enlightenment. It was a military surrender dressed in legal language. The document itself was a list, 63 clauses hammered out by exhausted men who had spent months trying not to kill each other. Most of those clauses were immediately practical. Specific taxes abolished, specific prisoners to be released, specific injustices reversed. The barons were not philosophers. They wanted their money back and their dignity restored. But buried in the middle of that list was something no one had quite written down before. Clause 39, a sentence so compact, so quiet, that it is easy to read past it without understanding that it changed everything. No free man shall be seized, imprisoned, or stripped of his rights or possessions, or outlawed or exiled, save by the lawful judgment of his equals, or by the law of the land. 600 years later, the men who wrote the American Constitution would reach for those exact words. The Fifth Amendment, the 14th Amendment, due process. The idea that power must answer to law, that a king cannot simply decide you are guilty and act on it, was born in that field on a gray June morning, surrounded by mud, armed men, and the faint smell of the Thames. John had no intention of keeping his word. He never did. Within 10 weeks, he had written to Pope Innocent III, his new ally after years of bitter conflict with Rome, and convinced him to declare the charter null and void, an illegal document forced on an anointed king by rebel subjects. The Pope agreed. The ink was barely dry, and already the greatest legal document in English history had been canceled by the church it was supposed to protect. Civil war exploded, the First Barons' War. The rebels invited the French crown prince to take the English throne. It was as bad as it sounds. And then, in October 1216, John solved the problem by dying, probably dysentery. possibly from the stress of watching his baggage train, containing the crown jewels of England, swallowed by a tidal estuary called the Wash while he watched from shore. He was 49 years old. His 9-year-old son became Henry III. England now needed a regent, someone to hold the kingdom together long enough for a child to become a king. The council looked at each other, and then they looked at the only man in England who had ever held impossible things together by sheer force of reputation. William Marshal, at nearly 70 years old, became regent of England. His first act, before he dealt with the French invasion, before he addressed the Civil War, before almost anything else, was to reissue Magna Carta. He stripped out the clauses that had caused the most controversy, simplified it, made it law. He did it not because the barons demanded it, but because he believed it was right, and he had the authority to make it stick. Without Marshal, the charter dies in 1215 and is forgotten within a generation. Without the Templars who gave him the neutral ground to negotiate, he might never have reached the table at all. The stone effigies that lie on the floor of Temple Church today, Marshals beside the tomb of the very men who sheltered him, are not decorative. They are the last witnesses of the moment when a bully's capitulation accidentally became the foundation of modern law. Here is the question history rarely asks. What if none of this had been an accident? The Templars did not witness Magna Carta. They created the conditions for it. They provided the space. They provided the protection. They backed the one man who could make both sides sit down, and they stored the charter's sealed copies in their vault afterward where no angry king could burn them. William Marshal did not happen to be nearby. He had spent 50 years being exactly the kind of man this moment required, someone whose word was worth more than any king's army. And John, that small, suspicious, cruel, and finally terrified man, he gave them the reason. Without his particular brand of catastrophic misrule, there would have been nothing to resist, nothing to reform, and no document to smuggle across 5 centuries of revolution to land in the hands of men in Philadelphia in 1787. Freedom is rarely born from virtue. It is born from necessity, from the moment when enough people finally agree that enough is enough, and find one person willing to hold the door open long enough for the idea to survive. The next time you hear the words due process, remember a meadow in England. Remember an old knight who refused to let a bad king destroy a good idea. Remember warrior monks who turned a church into the safest room in a kingdom at war with itself. And ask yourself, whose door are you holding open?